I'm working on a story and I want to come up with the setting for the story. And so this this little set of videos is going to be about how to basically do some environmental design. Okay, so the first thing is the story that I'm working on kind of takes place in a historical setting. It's going to be small town America in the 1940s. And what you want to start to do is you want to start to explore a shape language. You want to start to see kind of, is the main village that you're working in, is it circles? Is it squares? Triangles? And most things are going to be some kind of combination of these. Most places, most drawings, most work that we do going to come out to be, in some sense, related to these basic shapes, okay? So, for instance, when you look out across the top of the town that I'm going to be trying to draw, you'll see these cascades of triangles. And maybe even there may even be like steeple shapes up in the background like that. Real kind of villagey. I just watched a movie last night called The French Dispatch, and they had all of these old French villages, and so there were a lot of shapes like this. It was kind of in Paris, and you could see in the background shapes like that, and occasional shapes like this. So this was kind of how, that was kind of the structure of the shape language. I'm kind of thinking of a small town in America, and there's always, in a small town America that I was sort of a kid in, there's always a church, and the church has this kind of steeple-like shape. There might be more than one. And then there might be municipal buildings, and the municipal buildings have these kind of domes or something like that, and then little houses that inhabit the areas around them. And those shapes could be something like that. You know, these like little triangles. If you think of Star Wars or Tatooine, something like that, where they find Luke Skywalker, the shapes of the houses are like this. It's these it's these kind of pod circles. So after a little bit of consideration has been given to a very basic shape language for the structures, and I don't know if this is after or before, but uh, another really relevant consideration becomes the geography. And there are a few kinds of geography to be considered right off. The first one is this like a village on a flat plain? So here's a kind of a flat plain. And if I had this kind of a village off on a flat plain, it would be I'm going to be looking at these kinds of shapes built onto kind of a flatness. Another thing to consider would be mountains. Like, is it a kind of hilly place? Like, if you had, and there would be different kinds of mountains. And I really like to use cross contour lines. And notice how my cross contour lines, this here becomes my horizon line right there. It's the most level. And now this one kind of bends downward. These are bending downward there. And where there's a mountain, there might be one in the distance, and I can show the distance by I've got this cross contour line, and in the distance I want to make them a little closer. And then as I get down to and I could go further if I feel like it, and I'm going to start playing with my shape language in there and see what the effect is. So I'm primarily working in these little triangles with a steeple. And this would also, the steeple could also be replaced. This could also be kind of a medieval sort of village. And the triangle is getting smaller as you go into the distance. Another geography would be a kind of a, we could have a valley. It could be like, there could be another thought is a valley or a basin. So where you're drawn into a kind of a low area sometimes, and I want to do this again with a kind of topography, so you can see that the village sits inside this, and now I'm looking down into, and so I'm just gonna start sketching the shapes that I was thinking of into this geography. Another possibility is a sort of a river valley, and this just kind of goes on and on. Okay, so this is a kind of, I'm gonna imagine hills on either side, and maybe hills in the distance, and then this river passing through. And then I'm going to start to put in my little triangles. And the steeple. Another one that I think is really fun to explore, like an ocean setting. There's like England or Ireland or Scotland, they have these cliffs along the ocean. And I happen to be, here we could have a steeple up here and little triangle shapes. I happen to be working right now to kind of discover something that might be more historical. but it would be fine also to stay inside of a kind of a fantasy range with it. Like you could, if you have cliffs coming down to the water, and like something like Gondor is a whole it's a whole city built onto the side of a cliff like this, like out of the Lord of the Rings. So here's a shape language, here's a geography, and what's important for me in these little sketches is partially that they don't go too far. Like I'm just looking for them to begin to inspire my imagination. And so you can start to see, you start to look at them when I'm saying go too far, like you're very specifically wanting to work small, and you're not wanting to encompass a lot of details. And so then the next thing is, if you start to make some choices, like I'm kind of liking, I love these seaside villages. I think are really beautiful. But for the story that I'm working on, I don't think that I want to do a kind of seaside village. This sort of picture is really working well for me. The hill and maybe the river, like so. I think that I could start to combine something like that. And the next thing that you want to start to look for is foliage patterns. Like what kind of trees are you going to be dealing with in a place? And so inside of you have tree shapes that are based on circles, and you have tree shapes that are based on triangles, and then you have tree shapes that come out to be a little bit more boxy, like but never just a box. But you can imagine that you have tree shapes based on these shapes. Like that could be a pine tree, and this could be an oak tree, and this could be an elm tree. You might see a slight variation in the shape of it, like that. And something like this can become a really, really nice punctuation. So let's say, for instance, I'm going to work with this and the river valley. So I want to design a geography that has a hill and a river down at the bottom. So there's a river passing through the bottom, and a flat plane, and I'm wrapping around. I'm trying to get a cross contour that wraps really nicely, and then I'm going to do a lower hill in the background. So, and there could be even a further hill off there. And now the shapes, these triangle shapes of the houses, and these are very sort of Euro-American, European like houses. If they were Japanese or something like that, you could do triangles that were more flat, like less steep, working in a zone like that. Would have a more of an Asian feeling. Steeples in the background, houses moving into the foreground. I think that I'm being too I think that my shape language for my purpose right now, it feels overly steep. And then we have these foliage pattern, like I can start to introduce shapes of trees. And if you have a lot of trees, the place will feel verdant and healthy. Like in